Have you ever wondered why Burger King is called Hungry Jack's in Australia?
I have wondered this. Yes. Yeah.
Do you know why?
I'm not sure. No. Someone else.
Intellectual
Someone owns.
property.
Someone owns the name.
Yeah. Would you like to hear more?
Yes, absolutely.
So this actually, I just give you the rabbit warren which I went down to actually get to this topic. And so it started by, I saw in the news this week that Pizza Hut Australia, the franchise license was purchased by a company called Flynn Restaurant Group, which is the largest franchisee in the US. And so that then led me down a bit more of a rabbit warren, I suppose, or whatever you want to call it. In that I was like, oh, hang on a second, but there's another company that owns, like, Yum Brand is like a pretty big publicly held food brand company in the US. And I was like, oh, but don't they own Pizza Hut? I don't understand how this works. And then I realized that, like, owning a brand and being a franchisee of that brand are two very different things. And that there's these people who have made a lot of money leading up basically between the 50s and now, who have just specialized in being a franchisee. And that like these massive franchisee companies who own, like, for example, the franchisee license for like every Wendy's, every KFC, every Pizza Hut. And then they're just operators, which I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then I looked at the equivalent in Australia and landed on a guy named Jack Cohen, who is we're going to learn a bit more about. And so he's the Hungry Jack's man, and you can already see a link in the name there to him. And so we are going to dive into that. So, do you know what the oldest American fast food chain is? I wonder if you would know this. It's not anything we've ever seen in Australia.
The oldest American fast food chain.
Yeah,
Well,
arguably
obviously,
sort of the first one.
okay. Obviously, it's not going to be
It's not
McDonald's
McDonald's.
then, because yeah,
You would know that. Yeah.
I would know that.
It's called
yeah,
White Castle.
White
Have you ever heard of
Castle.
this?
Yeah.
You have only heard of it like in a movie or something, for example.
I've seen
been
it
to the
so I know it from Impractical
Okay.
Jokers, because
Oh,
you know
yes.
the show with the four guys, and they go behind the counter and they have to do just ridiculous stuff behind the
Yes.
counter.
Is that the one where he has to, I think he's serving with just the apron on or something like that?
Yeah, some stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I have seen that one. Yes, good touch point. So they were founded in 1916, which is a really long time ago, more than 100 years ago. And so Burger King, let's talk about the foundations of Burger King, and then we'll weave that into how that sort of extended into Australia. So Burger King was founded in its very first iteration in 1953. And now I say that because it was not called Burger King. It was called Burger King.
Wow.
Insta-Burger, second word King. And the reason for that is because it was based on a machine called the insta-Broiler. And so this allowed them to cook the burgers. So they could cook up to 400 burgers an hour. And it was, when you go to these hotels, and when you cook toast, you don't put it in a toaster in a hotel. You put it in the little conveyor belt, and it goes in, and then it goes down, and it comes back out. Yeah?
Yeah.
Same product, but it was for burger patties. And so this was this big thing. It sort of was one of the instigators of the ability to create fast food burgers. And so they were so encapsulated by it, they called it Burger King. However, the machine quite quickly became unreliable. And so David Edgerton, who was one of the two co-founders of Burger King, allegedly got so annoyed with it that he vowed to create his own proprietary cooking method. And so basically that's what ultimately led to their kind of like well-known flame cooked burgers. And so they changed their method. And so that's kind of now one of the hallmarks. If you see a lot of their branding on TV and stuff like that, it has flames everywhere, and it's, flame cooked Whopper and stuff like that, right? So at this point, unfortunately, quite quickly, and that is within about 6 years, they ran into some pretty serious financial difficulties. So much so that two of the franchisees who had started a bunch of restaurants actually purchased the whole brand and renamed it Burger King. And so that was the foundation of Burger King as we know it today. So if we skip a number of years, get us to 1967, at this point, Burger King is purchased or acquired by a company named Pillsbury. Now, you won't necessarily have heard of Pillsbury, although it is, I think, still to this day, one of the largest like cake mix manufacturers in the US. Is, or it certainly was, owned for a time by General Mills. I'm not sure if it still is. General Mills is, one of the biggest cereal cake companies in the US, and I think even into Australia. And so this is an important point. It seems irrelevant, but it is important. We'll come back to it in a minute. And so one interesting point that's just funny is that so obviously Pillsbury's buys Burger King, and they're trying to revive it and expand it, make it bigger. They think they know what they're doing. They're a big corporate, and so they poach the McDonald's chief operating officer, whose name is Donald Smith. And he becomes the CEO of Burger King for a period of time. So let's talk about the global expansion. So in 1963 was the first location internationally for Burger King, which was Puerto Rico, actually. Second location was Canada in 69. And third was Australia. So we're third on the list of importance, which is interesting. And so if you were to travel in time into three different time periods, if you into the 70s, as I said, where Burger King first came to Australia, you'll notice that there was only Hungry Jack stores. Now, what you may not realize due to our age is that if you were to come to Australia in the 90s, particularly maybe in the first half of the 90s, you'll notice both Burger King's and Hungry Jack stores. Did you know that?
No.
Yes.
Interesting.
So there was both, a substantial number of both. But now, which is our current experience, there's only Hungry Jack stores. So we're going to dissect how that happened and why that happened. So basically, foundations. I mentioned Jack Cohen. He's originally a Canadian businessman, now lives here in Sydney in Australia, and he became the exclusive and sole franchisee in Australia. Had the rights to the territory to open. He was the person who could open stores that were Burger King stores. He opened his first store in Perth in Australia. And it's worth noting here the way that it's structured in the US. So Burger King has a number of subsidiaries that are responsible for different things. One of them, for example, is Burger King Brands, which is responsible for all of their IP management. And there's about 40 or so of these subsidiaries that look after different elements of the business. Now, unfortunately, in 1971, as I mentioned, they reach out to, they establish a connection with Jack Cohen, and they quickly realize that the trademark for Burger King in Australia is already taken. And so this is an issue and a large oversight by the in-house counsel, in my personal opinion. Particularly since it was third on the list. It's not as if they came to Australia 10th on this list of international countries. It's obviously a priority, and yet no one realized, or too late realized, that it actually wasn't possible to go there with the branding. So what did they do? So basically, I should just quickly mention like the foundations of trademarks. So basically, you can kind of take it all the way back to 1883, which is called the Paris Convention, which forms like a bunch of IP-related standards. And that links on to all of the countries that are in the World Trade Organization, and basically stipulates that you need to manage and operate your IP in a uniform manner to uphold some of the IP standards, which is really important, I guess, in a commercial world. And so it's interesting. So basically, Burger King US did try to negotiate purchasing the Burger King IP from the owner here in Australia, but it was declined. And so instead, what Burger King did was provided Cohen with a list of options, like a list of names that they did have trademarked here in Australia. And one of them was Hungry Jack.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why, and this comes back to the Pillsbury thing, the reason why they did have that trademark is because if you were to Google Hungry Jack pancake mix, it is a pancake mix that's still made to this day by the Pillsbury brand. And so for that reason, they held it just in case that brand wanted to, extend into Australia. So he liked it. Evidently, his name's Jack. Obviously, that seemed favorable to him. And so they added an apostrophe and an S to make it possessive. And so it became Hungry Jack's. Now, you might be wondering, but who owned Burger King in Australia? Who owned the IP? Well, it's a man who I could find little information on, but I can give you some. His name's Don Dervin, and he was originally an American who obviously was aware of Burger King through some series of very smart events, came to Australia, checked, and realized that Burger King was not registered here. I don't know whether he came back to Australia with a list of, we're talking in the 60s here. So came back to Australia with a list of options and was just, maybe he went to the intellectual property registry and just asked them, is this registered? Is this registered? Is this registered? And found Burger King, realized it wasn't registered. Because I can't imagine how any other way that he would have been able to do it in that time. It's not like he was able to, I assume he wouldn't be able to jump on the internet and just type them all in. Anyway, so he realized, purchased it, or registered it is better. And so he started his own very small chain of Burger Kings here in Australia. And it was waitresses on roller skates who would come out with the burgers and deliver it to people in their cars. And he ended up with about 17 restaurants, so not insignificant, mostly in South Australia, a little bit in WA. And for Gage, allegedly 1970s, his revenues were in the realm of about $1 million annually, which is, I think, something like reaching almost 8 million in today's money. So as I mentioned, he wouldn't sell the IP because he knew how valuable that was to Burger King, but he did agree to sell a number of his stores. And so Burger King, or more specifically, Jack Cohen, purchased a number of his physical locations and rebranded to Hungry Jack's, as I mentioned. Now, going forward a little bit here to the 1990s, by this point, Burger King had become one of the largest international franchisees for the Burger King company. And in 1993, the Burger King trademark expired in Australia.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So Burger King Corporation, of which I'll refer to them as now because it's going to get confusing. Burger King Corporation, being the company in the US, purchased the IP in Australia. So now they own the brand. They can go in and they can start operating Burger Kings in Australia. But they have that exclusive agreement with Jack Cohen, who owns, by this point, 250 Hungry Jack's stores in Australia. And they can't necessarily go in and infringe on that. So basically, at this point, Burger King Corporation realized that there was some success in Australia. Australians were liking the product, liking the stores, and they wanted in. So they made numerous unsuccessful attempts to purchase Jack Cohen's Hungry Jack's business, essentially. Go in, buy it all up, make it all corporate owned, and roll it out as Burger King, now that they own the IP. But he declined. So instead, as I said, this is all in 1993, Burger King purchased, this is really interesting, Burger King Corporation purchased 4 existing Hungry Jack stores from separate franchisees. So people who had franchised from Jack Cohen as the major franchisor, and rebranded them to Burger King stores behind his back.
Yeah.
So some litigation ensues. So in 1998, so it's 5 years later, I guess this was maybe just a legal thing. Like this stuff takes a while usually.
Yeah.
Burger King Corporation attempted to formally terminate their agreement that they had with Jack. And they, at the same time, announced a $50 million plan to open 40 Australian Burger King restaurants. And Cohen, at this point, Jack Cohen, counterclaimed, saying that they had breached their contract. And they claimed that he had, in fact, breached the contract in that he had not opened the required minimum number of annual stores, which was stipulated in the agreement. So there's 2 claims. They're in court. Who's going to win? Well, basically, long story short, is Jack Cohen won, and the court awarded him $70 million, about 70, I think it's $71 million in compensation and the right to continue the contract as the sole and exclusive franchisor in Australia. So by 2003, the Burger King Corporation had totally relinquished their operations to Cohen. There would have been some transaction there, whether they sold their properties that they had started to develop there or what happened there, I'm not sure. But in true Aussie fashion, so there was total access to Burger King at this point because they own the IP. They could have licensed it to him. But he decided to retain the Hungry Jack's branding and rebrand by this point 81 Burger King stores that were established in Australia, rebrand them to Hungry Jack's and formed a network of 300 stores of Hungry Jack's stores. And there's a comment here. I'll just read it out to you. So Cohen comments here to a paper saying, if someone can show us that changing the name to Burger King improves our image, then we'd have to consider it. But to change it just in order to have uniformity with international markets does not deliver a local benefit, which is true. It's interesting.
Wait, so that's interesting. Wait, if we go back a sec.
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
He's actually gone. He's like he had the option there to license that Burger King name after all these lawsuits and stuff.
Correct.
And he's gone through this whole turmoil. He's gone through this 20-year process or whatever. And then at the end of the day, he's taken this huge cash settlement and then not used the Burger King name anyway.
Correct.
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
It is very interesting. So nowadays, it's still so he's the CEO of a company called Competitive Foods Australia. Competitive Foods Australia is that sole franchisee for Hungry Jack's here in Australia, and there's now circa 400 stores in Australia. And as I said, he's the CEO of that holding company. Also worth knowing about Jack Cohen is that he's also responsible for bringing KFC to Australia. It's crazy, some people just do so much. However, they sold all 44 of their Australian stores back in 2013 for about $55 million to a different company. He also had the controlling stake in Domino's Pizza franchise Australia prior to it going public in 2005. And he owned a large stake in Lone Star Restaurant, the chain that arguably is not that successful here in Australia, but still seems to continue somehow.
They closed down the one just here the other day.
Oh, they did? As in the one in the shops?
In Katara. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, finally. I mean, that was long lived. Like, honestly, that stayed open for quite a while. And it was always empty.
Yeah.
And he even had a large stake in the 10 network, He May Still, which is still pretty crazy. And so to him personally, he is 80 years old. As I said, he lives in Sydney. He's ranked number 15 by Forbes in Australia in total net worth, and they approximate his net worth to be somewhere around $3 billion. At the peak of COVID, that number was $3.2 billion. And just prior to COVID, so a year earlier, his net worth was approximately 1.6, which means that during COVID, allegedly, he doubled his net worth, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy.
And now sitting at 3 approximately. So interesting guy. That is the story of Hungry Jack's and Jack Cohen here in Australia.
Yeah, cool. I mean, yeah, it's really interesting to see how he kind of took that brand that was sort of like it's like one of those domain people that buy all of the domains.
Oh yeah.
Of people,
yes,
registering businesses and
yeah.
stuff
So
like
Don
that.
Durvin, who you're referring to there, did that. That's right. Maybe that was the point. Maybe he went to the US, got a list of all the most successful brands, came to Australia, and just registered all of them or anything that he could. That's true, and that's, as you say, a lot of people do that with domains nowadays. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. It is worth noting. I'm not going to go into any detail because I haven't done enough research, but there is a lot of high court decisions here in Australia that try to interpret what is kind of like using a trademark not in good faith, if that makes sense. So registering a trademark that is an established brand in another country, registering it here in Australia just for the purpose of kind of leveraging that position. And there's some argument that had that have happened later. So, for example, if that happened now, there's some argument for them being able to get control of that IP based on some case law decisions as opposed to the legislation. But yeah, it's interesting.